My name is Johan Bjorklund. I'm the CEO of Betacom. I'm excited to be here today. I'm even more excited about what we're doing at Betacom. We're finding ourselves right now in the middle of a storm. You know, we have inflation, we have global supply chain issues, and so forth. The solution that we're providing with private wireless 5G and 4G really helps address these global supply chain issues by allowing for better data management, more secure, controlled applications, which allows manufacturing to be more functional here, actually onshore. We've been working for decades and decades and decades on offshoring manufacturing to China and other places. And I think now with the supply chain being as broken as they are, there's a real drive here for everyone really looking at bringing back manufacturing into this country. We see Intel, we see Ford, we see many other companies, driving more and more manufacturing back here. And at the sort of core of that, we need a robust wireless system that is secure, that is private, and where the data resides and stays within the firewall. So that's exactly what we're providing in Betacom. So I'll talk a little bit about our journey, who we are, and how we got to where we are right now. And just ask me questions as we go here. I know you guys are not shy. That's what I've been told. So please go ahead. So about Betacom, we are about a 32-year-old company at this point in time. We started in Tampa, Florida, and we were always in wireless. We started building wireless networks. It was 2G back then, early 90s. I wasn't around, by the way, and we focused mostly on the southeast part of this country. Myself, together with a group of investors, came in about 3 years ago, and we basically moved the headquarters to Seattle instead, Washington, and we expanded our wireless business quite a bit, and by that I mean the installation and the maintenance business of wireless. So we've been basically helping the carriers like Verizon, T-Mobile, AT&T, and so forth build their networks. And then we on top of that we have then added some other services to that, and that is the managed service around private wireless, which we're offering to enterprises. And we call that 5G as a service. And we launched the service about a year ago, and it's directly to enterprises. And when the FCC came out and they opened up the CBRS spectrum, 3.5 gigahertz, we realized that this is a really good opportunity for enterprises to own their own wireless networks, and with that they can do a lot of things that we'll talk about later. But one of the problems enterprises would have is that they are not wireless experts in 4G and 5G. And that entire ecosystem is quite fragmented, and it's always been used to functioning with really the operators, the wireless carriers being on top of it. So all the vendors in the wireless ecosystem are used to being specialists in their specific fields. So for example, they may be specialists in manufacturing radios, or manufacturing chipsets for radios, or manufacturing devices, or manufacturing a piece of a core network, and so forth. And the operators, the wireless carriers, they're so big, so they're used to working with the whole ecosystem this way. But if you're an enterprise, even if you're a big enterprise like a Walmart, for example, and you have an IT department, if you're going to take advantage of 4G or 5G and using this CBRS spectrum right now, you would have to be an expert in this field very quickly, and you would have to hire a lot of staff, and it would take a long time to get up and running. So our business idea was really to allow enterprises to own and control their own wireless network, 4G or 5G, without hiring any additional staff. So what we're doing is we're basically designing, we're installing, and then we're managing these networks on behalf of our customers and enterprises. That was the service that we launched about a year ago, and we've been very successful with that. We won a lot of rewards, and we have found a really nice niche, I would say, somewhere right between Wi-Fi and the carriers. And this is really a white space that hasn't really been available before. And we're super excited to be there. So besides being wireless experts, having been in the field for 30 years, doing mostly installation, we have also worked with large enterprises. We have done installations on large campuses such as airports, sports arenas, etc. So for example, we did the last 2 Super Bowl arenas. We installed wireless networks there. We had done several airports as well, and many large convention centers, hotels, etc. That kind of helped us to get into this space as well, right? Because these are later on becoming our customers, these type of enterprises. So when is it good to consider a private wireless networks, right? So we have all of these technologies. We have Wi-Fi. We also have, of course, the 4G, 5G, and so forth from the carriers as well. Well, one big thing that our customers are always asking for is they want to make sure that their data is secure and that their data never leaves their premises, never leaves their firewalls. So they want a network that they can control and they can own themselves, and they want that to sit within their own firewalls. But then they also want mobility and they want security at the edge. And if you think about Wi-Fi, which we're really positioning against quite a lot, Wi-Fi is not very secure at the edge, and it doesn't have very good mobility aspects either, right? Where you're moving from access point to access point, you very often lose connectivity with Wi-Fi, and it takes a while to reestablish that again. Another one, which is sort of the biggest knock, if you have business critical application, I think, is that if you don't control the spectrum, you actually don't control the outcome. You don't control the quality. And Wi-Fi is using public spectrum. So you don't know who else is going to be using that spectrum and when they'll be using that spectrum. And I'll talk later on about some of the use cases with some of our customers in different industries to explain more how that works and why private wireless is a very good solution. And it's also relatively cheap. It's a little more costly than Wi-Fi, but considering also that we offer management services on top of this as well, right? It's actually pretty cost competitive as well. So what do we see the real drivers then being for private wireless right now? Well, we really see a lot of Industry 4.0 type of drivers, type of applications. So what is Industry 4.0? It's something that's been used quite a bit, but let's go back to all the industrial revolution starting from 1.0. What was 1.0? Well, that was really sort of water, steam power, and so forth, which later led to railroads, etc., and a lot of innovation around that. After that came electricity, which then, of course, Graham Bell invented the phone, and then in the 60s we got the microchips and so forth, which drastically increased computing power. Later on, PCs and so forth came from that, and now we have 4.0, and 4.0 is really about outcomes in terms of driving that through automation, autonomous systems, and so forth. And when we talk about 4.0, we always talk about a bunch of technologies, right? So IoT, machine to machine, big data. We talk about artificial intelligence, robotics, and so forth. But for me, it's actually way more than that. The important thing about Industry 4.0 is to drive different business outcomes, to drive better business outcomes. And at the end of the day, it's really how do you control your data? How does your data move from system to system? And at the end of the day, we see this cutting across a lot of different industries. And the industries that we're in right now that are really impacted by this is manufacturing, logistics, which really ties into the supply chain. And that goes for the airline industry as well, by the way. But let's take a step back. Let's look at telephony and 4G, 5G, and so forth, the cell phone industry. Where did we come from? If you go back 130 years or so, when Graham Bell invented the phone, it took about 100 years to connect the first 100,000 places. Then it took another decade or so when wireless came, and it was really 1G, and then we connected people instead. And it took about 10 years to connect 20 million people. Then it took another 10 years as we got GSM to connect the first billion people. So now we're around 2000 or so. And then it took another 10 years or so, and we were at basically 6 billion, basically the entire population in the world. And when 3G was sort of at the tail end in 2007 or so, that's when Apple invented the iPhone and the real smartphone came. And Apple came from the PC industry. And I don't know if you guys remember, and if you guys were on AT&T when that happened here in this country around 2007, but more or less overnight, AT&T's network just went down. That was essentially all the signaling that was happening with the iPhone that nobody had really thought about and had anticipated. That just brought down the 3G networks. And that was why there was such a big need for 4G at the time. Everybody needed a 4G network. And in 2009, the first carrier that deployed 4G was actually Metro PCS, followed by Verizon here in this country. But everybody needed it. So in the next 10 years, there was really full push for smartphones for 4G. So 4G is really built for smartphones and supporting that. 5G was invented somewhere around 2009. So roughly 10 years before it was deployed. And that's usually how long the standards take in this industry. And 5G was really all about massive machine to machine. It was about industrialization of applications. And of course, we all know about lower latency. We know about higher throughputs and so forth and speeds. Yeah, that's a given. But it was really built for, not for smartphones or for consumers really, but it was really built for industrial applications. And that's one of the reasons why I'm so excited to be in the space that we're in right now with private wireless, because along the lines with this also came the cloud. And right now, 5G in combination with the cloud and edge cloud can really drive a completely different set of applications for industrial type of applications. So why do we need 5G then in industrial applications, and why do we need the edge cloud? It really comes down. There are a lot of different reasons for it, right? But when you have only a few IoT devices on your network, 4G is really good. And the latency with 4G is also actually quite good. We see that especially with edge cloud, we see really, really low latency with 4G. But where 5G comes in is when we start seeing millions and millions of devices being connected at the same time, and where these devices need to react with each other and communicate with each other in real time. That's really when 5G comes in. So examples of that in industrial places, of course, are like safety sensors and so forth, where you have maybe robots moving quickly, on the work floor, and people and so forth can come into contact with them. So we have to have a robust safety application. So that's one of them. If you look at them at private 5G, right? So the space that we're in right now, the three sectors that we're focusing on is manufacturing, warehousing, and airports. And when we're talking to companies, businesses from these industries, we're kind of hearing the same message from them. And that is that they want a secure solution, and they want a robust solution, and they want to make sure that it's up and running and that they have high reliability and very good coverage with the solution that they're picking. And that's why private wireless is so good, because it really provides the best world off of what carriers can offer with their 5G solution, which is really good. That's deployed sort of on a macro scale, right? So you get a lot of connectivity in a lot of different places at the same time. But then Wi-Fi, which you deploy in a much smaller setting, and you can be much more specific. You can deploy it within your own firewall, so you can retain your data. Private wireless kind of it deploys like a Wi-Fi solution, but you get all the benefits that you get also from a carrier 4G or 5G solution as well. So some use cases then, if we go into manufacturing, for example, manufacturing right now is really, really hot in the US. We see a lot of manufacturing actually starting being ramped up now. I mentioned a couple of examples like Ford and Intel and so forth, right? And we have spent, let's be honest, right? We spent decades and decades on outsourcing this type of work specifically to China. So now when we're coming back here, there's a lot of infrastructure that's missing. So there's negative with that, but there's actually some positive as well. The positive is that we can kind of start from scratch. We don't have that legacy technology necessarily that we have to also maintain in some of the cases. In some of the instances, we can actually build from scratch, which is not necessarily a bad thing. So one application that we see manufacturers are looking at right now, for example, if you think about an assembly line, they very often set it up in like small sort of workstations, and all of these workstations are connected. And guess how they're connected? Through an Ethernet port, virtually all of them. Why? Because Wi-Fi doesn't work. Because for the reasons that we talked about before, they can't control the spectrum, so they don't have enough capacity there. Sometimes mobility is difficult as well if you're gonna move things around quickly and so forth. But they're all virtually connected to Ethernet. The wireless carriers you can connect it to as well, but depending on the application, it can become quite costly, or you may or may not have coverage there as well. So what they would like to do, they would like to have their own private wireless network that they can use, and they can connect all these workstations to. Because when they have to reassemble these assembly lines, which happens quite frequently, they don't have to reconfigure physically as well as logically all these Ethernet ports that are connected to each workstation. So that's a very, yes, please.
So you've talked a lot about manufacturing, specifically around safety, specifically around safety and life and limb type of situation.
Yep.
I'm seeing CBRS being positioned into these critical life and limb safety issues, but they're being positioned leveraging GAA licenses as a good enough. What's your take on a good enough critical life and limb safety issue leveraging GAA licenses compared to having to purchase a PAL, which trashes your ROI?
Yeah.
How can you really say life and limb safety issues without talking about the costs associated with PAL?
Yeah, we have so when we deploy in GAL, we actually get if you need 20 megahertz, we get that dedicated, and then we have the SaaS solutions, right, from companies like Google or Federated Wireless and so forth that will guarantee you that you will have the spectrum. You may not have the exact same spectrum, but you're going to have that chunk of spectrum which may move around dynamically. So you will still have the spectrum, even though you don't have the PAL license. So that's why we can say that they are going to get the spectrum that they're paying, that we're offering, right?
But your spectrum moving around, while you may certainly get a chunk of spectrum, you can't say that moving around is going to be hitless, especially when manufacturing facilities are running 24/7, 365. I have a hard time sort of pitching, don't worry about it. Don't worry about your life and limb safety issues, but the magic gods that control the spectrum may flip your channel, and you may have a tiny little blip. Don't worry about it. It's not going to kill anybody.
Yeah. Well, you can also deploy depending on how.
So yeah, I completely understand your concern on that. So the key is first, so there's 150 megahertz available. The concern is really more on the maritime incumbent, which is the Navy, and that's more applicable on the coastlines, and that's only 50 megahertz. So there's still 100% available theoretically for GAA. And the way to address that for your specific concern is that when you're inside a facility, as opposed to say an outdoor county or an outdoor environment, when you're inside a facility, you're essentially enclosed from the outside world. So that enterprise really owns, in a way, the spectrum that can be broadcasted within that facility. So theoretically, within that facility, the way the SaaS license works and the allocation based on your geolocation, it will understand that inside that facility, you won't be interfering to, say, an adjacent facility. So therefore, it will essentially always guarantee you, to Johan's point, the 20 megahertz, and likely you'll have even more than that. So it's really understanding your geo position and how the SAS system works. It can get a little challenging, to your point, when you move to an outdoor environment and you're potentially competing with other neighbors who may be utilizing that spectrum. And so for those use cases where you have a need for indoor, outdoor, and when I say outdoor, I mean like you're getting off campus of a facility. So for example, in an airport, it's miles and miles of fence line to fence line that the county or the CDA owns. So it's very difficult for somebody to broadcast into that from the outside. So if you work with the SAS vendors, you can essentially geofence your area and essentially obtain the right to that area, and therefore broadcast GAA in that area.
And then I'd also, so that's exactly right. And then also most of the applications that we're deploying are actually not safety related; they're productivity related. So
except it says right there, emergency stops.
No, but I said most of them. But so I don't want to give the impression. I did talk about that because the reason I talked about a lot about that was because that's kind of the difference between 4G and 5G. If you have a lot of these things, so that's why I highlighted that. But most of the applications are absolutely productivity related. So for example, the manufacturing assembly line right now is one of them, right? Another one which I'm going to talk about next is if you have these robotic solutions, right, that are for warehousing, that are moving around trucks and so forth, right, autonomously or sometimes remote controlled. What has happened is a lot of them were relying on Wi-Fi to begin in, because wireless was sort of everybody assumed that there would be a wireless network there and it's going to work well until they deployed it, right, with their customers, and then they realized, oh my God, we have a lot of downtime. And the downtime was significant. It was somewhere around 30% or so on average that we've seen in some of these facilities. And that's where private wireless really has come into play. And I think Assad will probably show, when he's going to show some of the demos later, he's probably going to show a couple of maybe those use cases as well, how this propagate inside of a building, even though sometimes it's through like large shelves and so forth, right? And when you're moving around, when these robot solution autonomous vehicles are moving around inside of the building, they will not lose connectivity when they're moving and they're doing handovers between access points, because that's part of what's inherent in these 5G solutions, right? To deal with that mobility aspect. The other thing that I want to highlight here as well is security, and security at the edge, right? So 5G comes really from in the infancy of from the GSM standards. So the negotiation on the back end around authentication is also really robust. And when we're getting more and more IoT devices introduced into the network, we're getting more and more security threats from that, right? So that's also another benefit here that these type of companies are looking for. Airports and airlines, this is another pretty interesting application, right? So we deployed in Dallas Fort Worth a trial network there, and we used baggage scanning as an application that we deployed. And the baggage scanning, I'm talking about baggage scanning that's like underneath, below the wing operations, right? So it's like after you drop off your luggage at the check-in, it goes on the conveyor belt and it goes below the airport, below the terminal, and then it gets picked up and it gets loaded onto one of those trucks, right? That's where a lot of mistakes happen. That's where right now in a lot of places airports are blind, and the transportation is maybe 100, 200 feet or so, but that's where a lot of luggage is getting lost. And the scanning solutions there, it's very hard to get coverage because of all the concrete and the blockages that exist there. So sometimes they're using Wi-Fi, sometimes they're using public networks. But when we deployed a private wireless network there, we did this with Dallas Fort Worth and American Airlines. They actually reduced the turnaround time for the airplanes at the gate by 22%. 22%. That was one application. Because what happens a lot of the times, right, is that the scanner's not really working, so they have to slow down the process and to scan all the bags because it's super costly for the airlines to lose bags. It's way more costly than I thought it was actually. And a lot of times when you're down there, you see, and I've been down several times now, you actually see bags sitting there on the tarmac, and it's very easy just to pick them up, but people don't pick them up. They can sit there for days. And it's interesting to see where the bags have been originated from, where it's going and so forth, the dates and so forth. They're sitting there for quite some time. So sometimes airlines actually collect them, and it's just cheaper for them to get rid of the bags than to find the right destination at the end of the day. They're going to pay, of course, the fee then to their passenger, right? So it's a pretty big problem, but it's only one of the applications. Challenge with Wi-Fi at an airport, it goes back again to the limitation of spectrum. So it's not necessarily that you can't just add more SSIDs, right? More Wi-Fi networks. It's about the limitation of spectral resources. So when you have these type of business critical applications in your operations, it's usually when the airport is at its busiest, right? That's when you have most of the people coming through and so forth. But when it's at its busiest, that's also when you have most passengers logging on to the other Wi-Fi networks. So they're sucking out a lot of the resources out of the air. So private wireless works very, very well in terms of putting your most critical business applications, because you can control your outcomes. It's really about control, which is what these enterprises are looking for. So Industry 4.0 then, if you think about that as a concept enabled by private 5G, it's really delivering local control. It gives control to our customers. And it can entirely transform the supply chain, both from a manufacturing perspective, which we can bring more local to, at the end of the day, the end consumer. And now with Amazon, of course, we all expect through a click of a button to expect the merchandise showing up, on our doorstep the day after. I mean, think about it. Think about how long and difficult and cumbersome that process is right now, in terms of if you're ordering parts for your microwaves that may have broken, or if you're ordering a pair of sneakers or whatever that is, right? I mean, it's a very, very long and fragile supply chain. A lot of things are being made in China. And China, as you know, has a pretty extreme, I would say, COVID policy, where they shut down quickly just by seeing a few cases, right? So Shanghai, for example, was shut down for about three months. And you think about all the ships, all the freighters, I don't know if you have pictures of that sitting outside of Shanghai. Those were ships that needed to be unloaded, and then loaded as well, right? Because there are a lot of manufacturing plants in Shanghai. So I think COVID has really put a strain on the entire supply chain, right? Both from a consumer perspective, people have been sitting home having more time, they shop more online and less in the stores. And then that was a trend that was already happening. But then that's even made worse by the COVID policy that China is employing. So that's one of the reasons why we see manufacturing moving more and more onshore. Now, it's going to take a long time to undo decades and decades of outsourcing, of course. But we believe that private wireless, and we're hearing this from a lot of our customers, is a central solution to making that happen, to allowing for onshore US manufacturing. And we won a lot of industry awards. We've only launched about a year ago this service, and our customers, as well as a lot of industry players and forums, have noticed us and the innovative solution that we actually bring. Because what we do is we really sort of button up the entire wireless industry, and we're making it accessible for enterprises, and we're basically allowing them to have a private wireless network with all the benefits that comes with, without hiring one single resource to their staff. And that makes it very easy for them, compared to if they were to go and procure and get expertise to really run and operate the network like this themselves. Yes, please.
So when sorry,
Okay.
when you go in and install and manage, design the network, is it like an overlay network, or do you connect the private 5G nodes to the existing switches that the customer may have on site?
Yeah, it's a good question. We usually so what we need really is we connect it inside of their firewalls, and what we do is we connect it to Ethernet and to their fiber. Basically, that's how we connect it. So we don't. So when you say switches, do you mean they're
like, I mean, if they have like access switches for access points, do you use the same switches for the nodes, or do you have your own switches, like overlay kind of infrastructure that you deploy?
So basically, it depends on the enterprise. It depends on the customer, right? If the customer is willing to lend their infrastructure, depends on their security policy, then certainly we can leverage that. But if a customer is more hesitant for us to connect into their existing infrastructure, we'll do it in parallel. So in that sense, it'll be an overlay. So it really depends enterprise to enterprise.
So my question was very similar. I just wanted to verify. So you're deploying all the node Bs inside and outside. You're deploying a full core network, and you are integrating it with the enterprise, and then building on what he was saying. Like if I wanted to use the enterprise radius system rather than the cellular authentication system, I can do that. Right?
Todd, did you hear the question?
Yes, yeah. So we're deploying the entire. So one of the models we have is deploying the entire core network on premise of the enterprise or the customer, and that could reside within their firewall. So they're controlling what's getting in and what's getting out of the enterprise network, and then within that they can leverage it for a variety of use cases how they please. So we basically enable them to have full control of the network, have full visibility of the network. They control the intra-traffic flowing within their enterprise. They own the data, and then they control what goes out of that network. So if there's cloud applications, we have the ability to bring that now to the edge, so it remains within the firewall. Or if the enterprise is comfortable interacting with a cloud client, then it's their policy. They can enable that in their firewall.
Okay, and then a follow-on question to that: the products that you're providing on the core network, is it all software-defined networking? Like, is it truly virtualized? It's the dream for 5G, or is it more hardware-focused?
No, it's definitely software focused. The hardware is it's a high-end server, and then you're just running our core software, which is Druid, on it, and then you're bunching various application stacks on it as well. So
yeah, we have different hardware solutions for the Druid solution.
You offer a neutral host offering?
We're offering data-only services. We're not offering a neutral host at this point in time. We're focusing very specifically on data and data only, and we just see that there's such a big space there for business critical applications in that space, right? So that's what we're focused on. Carriers and others, they have very robust, voice solutions and so forth, right? So we're staying away from that space.